Hi guys, welcome to my channel. The theme for this video, as you saw in the title, is problematizing the term mindfulness and why I think mindfulness, the term and the way it's used, is an issue. Now, if you haven't just subscribed to my channel yet, please do that. I'd appreciate it, just so I know that I'm not talking to the wall. And in this video, I'm going to explain where the term mindfulness comes from, what it is, and why I think the way the term and the practice is used is symptomatic of a wider and greater issue in the modern world and in the spiritual community in general. Now, the term mindfulness is obviously and blatantly a Buddhist practice. The term mindfulness is a mistranslation of the Pali word sati, which derives from the Satipatthana Sutta as taught by the Buddha. Originally, sati is a practice that you do in order to prepare yourself for meditation proper. Sati is not meditation. Mindfulness is not meditation. A lot of people, when I tell them that I work as a meditational coach and a yoga teacher, tell me that, I'm practicing mindfulness, I'm using the Headspace app, and I'm a little bit like, no, you're not practicing meditation. It's the same as warming up at the gym thinking that you're lifting weights. It's just not the same thing. And this meddling of terms is very, very common in the Western world because we're not paying the traditions that these practices come from their proper respect. So back to the term sati. Sati, and you can read about this yourself in the Satipatthana Sutta as taught by the historical Buddha. Sati is a practice whereby and wherein you place your attention in different parts and areas of the body, the physical body, in order to bring attention away from your mental jargon, from your mental acrobatics, into the here and now by focusing on the sensations of the physical body. This is sati. Now you start by practicing that, and then you gradually evolve the practice into paying attention to your emotional being, and then paying attention to your mental movements. So this is sati originally. A very effective practice, and a practice that I teach myself to my introductory students that are new to the systems of yoga and Buddhist meditations. Now, my first criticism of mindfulness is that it is a Buddhist practice taken completely out of its religious and spiritual context. When you take something out of its context, you don't see the full picture. This is the same as looking at a leaf and thinking that you're seeing a tree. It's the same as saying that a human being can be described by cutting off a finger. You have to look at something as part of an organic whole. And why have we taken the term and the practice out of its cultural and religious context? I'll explain that right now. That's because the ruling paradigm of the Western world right now is scientific materialism. Scientific materialism, as I've talked about in another video, says or assumes three fundamental things about reality. Those being materialism, saying that there's nothing that can exist that is not observable in the material world. The second is determinism, saying that whatever takes place now is predetermined by what took place in the past. And the last one is realism, the notion that there is one singular observable reality out there that is common to everything. These three axioms are never questioned in modern scientific materialism. They are rigorously questioned and deconstructed in Buddhism. So, the term mindfulness, originally sati, has been gelded, it's been castrated and taken out of its historical religious context, because if we look at it as taught by the Buddha in its spiritual context, it does not fit into a scientific materialist worldview. The issue here is that every epoch of history and every culture will have a ruling paradigm, which means that everything will have to fit into the conceptualizations of that paradigm. By doing that through Buddhist practice, we're completely losing track of its part in a bigger organic spiritual whole as part of a spiritual system. And I also want to say that it's very valuable to actually be able to look at the world and look at yourself in different paradigms through different perspectives. It's something that really greatly enriches your view and experience of reality. If you're only able to operate within one reality tunnel, as Robert Anton Wilson calls it, if you're only able to look at the world in one way, if you're only able to look at yourself through one system and methodology, your entire experience of reality will be limited to that perspective. But if you're, on the other hand, able to consciously adapt new paradigms and looking at everything from different angles, your experience of reality will of course be greatly enhanced. That's the same as if I look at an object, a physical object, from just one direction, I'll only see one part of that object. But if I'm able to move around, if I'm able to employ and use different perspectives on the same thing without assuming that any of these perspectives are more valuable or worthy than the others, then I can truly and freely observe reality without having to observe only the part of the reality that fits into the perspective that I'm locked to, that I'm enslaved to. So that's point number one. I'm criticizing mindfulness because it's a practice taken out of its religious context. This is both intellectually imprisoning, because it takes away our ability to look at stuff from different perspectives, and it's also disrespectful towards Buddhism, which is a religious and spiritual tradition that has spent the last 5,000 years looking at the human mind. And I want to pose a humble suggestion that maybe Buddhism, having spent the last 5,000 years almost looking at, now 5,000 years, I'm of course meaning 2,500, but Buddhism derives out of a wider and longer Vedic tradition. Let me rephrase that. It might be that the traditions of India, deriving from the Sanatana Dharma and the Vedas, knows something about the human mind and consciousness, having spent the last 5,000 years applying scientific rigor to analyzing the mind and its movements. So that's point number one. The term mindfulness, completely gelded, castrated, and taken out of its context, is disrespectful. It shows arrogance towards the spiritual traditions of the East, and it takes away the experience of actually looking at reality from different perspectives. Now, my second criticism of mindfulness is that it's commercialized. And we have a very, very sorry state of affairs in the modern Western world, where almost every part of reality is worthless unless it can be branded, marketed, and sold. We see this with mindfulness as well, which leads me to my criticism of Headspace and mindfulness apps. And I'm not criticizing these apps because I don't think they do any good. I think they help a lot of people. I'm criticizing the fact that they are portrayed as being apps that helps you meditate. What you're doing if you're using an app is not meditation, it's hypnosis. Because if you're dependent on the voice of somebody else, if you're dependent on an app that guides you through the meditation, you're not practicing meditation. The main difference between hypnosis, i.e. the fact that somebody else leads you into an altered state of consciousness, an expanded state of being, and meditation is whether you're actually doing it yourself. Meditation is where you're leading yourself and you're using what's here and what's here to guide your consciousness into a wider experience, a wider mode of being. You're not doing that if you're using an app, you're employing hypnosis, which is not the same thing at all. So my criticism here is practicing mindfulness, simple sati, is good for a lot of people, but it's not a scientifically proven technique. The scientific literature on mindfulness has proven correlation. So it has proven that if you're practicing mindfulness, if you're practicing sati, as it's properly called, you'll experience positive behavioral changes. So you'll experience probably a lessening of the symptoms of anxiety and depression, and that's amazing for a lot of people. But we do not know the active ingredient. We do not know scientifically, that is, how mindfulness practice actually influences the psychosomatic systems. Buddhism and yoga knows exactly why. We know the causation, so maybe it's worth listening to what the systems themselves have to say. Mindfulness has become really popular in the West, and spirituality is becoming more and more widespread and more popular. But it's also simultaneously becoming more and more commercialized and more reductive. What I mean by that is that every practice, if it cannot be understood scientifically or proven scientifically, is thrown out of the window. I think we're doing ourselves a disservice here, because in yoga and in Buddhism, an extremely important element of the sadhana, of your spiritual practice, is your shraddha, which means your faith. Now, shraddha does not mean blind faith. Shraddha means that you're trusting in the practice. You're trusting in the system. This is a very, very important part of the practice. The ability to surrender, the ability to put away your intellectual mode of being, your constant analysis of reality for a few seconds, and actually going into the practice from the heart, from consciousness. And we're losing that aspect of spiritual practice if we're only allowing and only focusing on the spiritual techniques that can be proven in a laboratory or that can be marketed, branded, and sold. We see this commercialization and marketing of spirituality everywhere, and we're ruining traditions and we're destroying indigenous cultures by focusing on this instead of actually respecting the spiritual traditions themselves and respecting spirituality as something worthy and valid in itself. Mindfulness and meditation is commonly branded and sold as performance enhancers, which means that there's something you do in order to become more productive and effective, which just essentially means better at making money. And approaching spirituality like this, approaching life like this, as something that you're supposed to exploit and perform, really, really takes away the beauty and mystery of life altogether, I think. Practicing spirituality just as a mere tool to make you more productive and better at accumulating wealth is not spirituality at all. It's just isn't. Spirituality is all about taking you into the moment, taking you into the present, expanding your consciousness into being able to experience constantly subtler and subtler, deeper and deeper, more and more of reality. Spirituality is not a performance enhancer. Although spirituality greatly enhances your performance, it makes you better at concentrating, it improves your memory, it improves your sleep, it makes you more relaxed. Those are side effects, those are siddhis, and they're not the main purpose of spirituality. So I do have an issue with spirituality and spiritual practices being taken out, ripped away from their cultural and spiritual context, branded and sold as mere performance enhancers. This really shows the state of affairs in the modern Western world as well, where everything is worthless unless it can be branded, sold, and commercialized as something that makes you better at accumulating wealth, which is basically how I see the current development in a lot of places when it comes to spirituality. So my getaway point here is read the Buddhist suttas, read the yogic texts, read the Vedic texts, the Upanishads, and look at what the systems themselves, what the cultures and the religions themselves are actually saying about the practice and how it works, instead of reading BuzzFeed about it. So that was my little criticism of the term mindfulness. I hope my points made sense and that I managed to clarify my point without sounding too angry, because I'm not against science being done on spiritual practice at all. I'm very pro that. I just wanted to reduce the term a little bit and show that there's a little bit more complexity here, and there's some points here worth mentioning when it comes to the whole discussion. Wishing you all a great rest of your day or a great night, and may all beings be happy and free of suffering. Thank you so much for watching.